One of the things that frustrates me the most about this whole trad wife, anti-feminist, birth rate panic discourse is the idea that a significant amount of Americans, many of whom are elected officials, still actually believe that women are happier when they're wives and mothers. That believe that the only way women can truly be fulfilled and happy is if they are wives and mothers. And their basis for this belief is that, the problems we have now, we didn't have all those problems when almost everybody was married and women were mostly housewives. Everything was great, back in the 50s. Women's lives were not good in the 50s. They were not. But the idea that so many Americans have in their head that women were happy living like this is based on a lie. It's based on post-World War II era propaganda. It's based on advertising. The media's portrayal of housewives in the 50s and 60s was not even close to what the reality of being a housewife in the 50s and 60s was. Imagine basing policy decisions as a legislature off of ads you saw on Instagram. That's how psychotic to me this idealized version of a housewife is, and how we try to push women back to that, saying, oh, that's the only way we'll be happy. We'll solve all the societal problems. There'll be no single mothers, et cetera, et cetera. If we just went back to the way things were, everything would be fine. So let's have a little chat about the way things were, shall we? Let me preface this by saying that our image of the 50s housewife is a white woman. That's what all the advertising is based on. That's who it's targeted to. But even though they're talking about a population that is not representative of all women, that's the ideal that we're supposed to aspire to. Even when conservative Black men say, oh, well, I'm the head of the house, you should be my helpmeet, blah, 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 whatever. The image they're talking about is that Madison Avenue housewife image that is a white woman. Because honestly, deep down, a lot of Black men just want to be white men. They want to be able to lord over their women like the white men do. But I digress. Things like this: The Good Wife Guide, 19 Rules for Keeping a Happy Husband. Advertising in the 50s was directed at wives. How to be a good wife, how you were supposed to look, how you were supposed to cook, how you were supposed to behave. The idea that women find fulfillment from being a housewife is bullshit. It's propaganda. If you freeze and pause, you can see what the wording says in little cartoon below on the right. Gosh, honey, you seem to thrive on cooking, cleaning, and dusting, and I'm all tuckered out by closing time. What's the answer? Vitamins, darling. I always get my vitamins. Vitamins, huh? You know what pills women were taking back in the day? Milltown, treating tension, anxiety, and nervousness. This was the first popular psychotropic drug in America. I and other feminists are often accused of denigrating mothers and saying that, being a mother isn't a good thing to be, and how that's bad for society, having a bad image of motherhood. That we need to put motherhood on a pedestal again, back in the day like we used to. But even in the day when motherhood was put on a pedestal, those women were treated like shit. It's not about motherhood. It's about how we treat mothers. And my argument is that until the treatment of mothers improves, you shouldn't be one. So it wasn't that women naturally had a weaker constitution and were more prone to depression, et cetera, et cetera. The reason why women are often more depressed, and particularly why those housewives back in the day were depressed and anxious, is because people treated them like shit. Particularly their husbands treated them like shit. The meds were used to cope with the horrible life they led. But let's move on to the next lie they tell you about women in the 1950s. Women didn't work. Married women, in particularly, didn't work. That's also bullshit. In 1950, working women who were married outnumbered single women in the labor force. 8.6 million married women worked versus 5.6 million single women. And the number of female workers increased from 29% to 34% in 1960. And married women made up nearly half of all working women. The image that we have of women in the 50s and what their lives were, it's not real. The image we have in our head is advertising. Advertising boomed in the 1950s, and the targets of advertising were mostly women. Cleaning products, things like vacuums, kitchen, food products, all these images and ads saying, oh, you have to cook the right food, you have to wear the right dress. Ooh, you better have fresh breath because there's always a woman lurking around just waiting to steal your husband. Hope your hair looks good, little lady. The text is so hard to see, but freeze and zoom. It says, we've heard it every time. If my hair looks like such a mess, I'll unalive myself. This is an ad for shampoo. This one from the 60s is especially egregious. Up off your knees, girls, Shinel Vinyl, the no wax floor is here. This is obviously overtly sexual, but it's about cleaning. It's really about submission and subjugation. So here's how it went. 1, men went off to war. 2, they needed women to work in the factories to produce war materials. 3, when they realized how productive women were and how women liked working, they said, uh-oh, we got to do something about this. Because even though a lot of women were fired after the war, not all of them were. There were women that were still working and still wanted to work, both married and single. So they had to do something to convince these women to get back into the home. And advertising was part of it. The government was even part of it. The United States of America engaged in a lot of post-war propaganda to fight communism mainly, but part of fighting communism was to present this idyllic vision of the home and women in it. And this was done in partnership with private industry. Women had proven during the war that they could work and that they could be productive. But once the war ended, both federal and state and a lot of times local policies replaced women workers with men. And it was a policy matter to drive women out of the workforce. And the advertising campaigns talking about the happy housewife helped that. The gender roles were very rigid. Practically every image of a woman in the 50s was cooking, cleaning, smiling, getting married, all these very sort of housewife, feminine, conservative images. And yet married women still worked. All this nostalgia, happy housewife, trad con stuff is longing for a world that never existed. We think that that image of the 1950s housewife was real, and we actually enact policies specifically designed to get women back to that, where women were depressed, on pills, not free, at the mercy of their cheating, violent husbands. That is in no way a situation we ever want to go back to. If you want to dive deeper into this, I suggest reading The Way We Never Were, American Families and the Nostalgia Trap by Stephanie Coontz.